As a young rookie, I was sitting in the patrol office one day, obviously frustrated. I was angry at the job, the staff, and my bosses. About what? I don't even remember anymore. It was just one of those I hate everybody and everybody hates me days. A veteran officer was standing in the doorway of the office and said, "Come on, let's get a cup of coffee." "Nah, I'm good. Don't really like coffee," I said. "Coffee ain't about coffee, kid. Let's go. I mean it." Coffee ain't about coffee. I'll never forget that because it's true. Getting coffee with your coworkers is a chance to vent, complain, cheer up, cajole, tease, and lead. I did some of my best leadership work over coffee. We solved the world's problems over coffee. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellums, and welcome to Blue Canary. Today, we're going to have coffee. Well, at least virtual coffee with my partner in crime on Blue Canary, Matt Molter, owner of Agency 360 and sponsor of the show. Hey, Matt, how do you like your coffee?
I actually don't drink coffee.
Of course not. Of course you don't drink coffee. And coffee's for those of us that are not nearly as motivated as you are.
I don't know how I got through night shift without that hook, but I made it, and I'm not going to start now.
That was one of the things is I didn't drink a lot of coffee until I did get on the job and start working night shift. And then you started picking it up and other people drinking coffee and hanging out and talking. And then pretty soon before you turn around, coffee is your lifeblood. And I've had a lot of really good interactions with people just sitting down and having, coffee with them, just being able to sit down and have a nice informal leadership meeting. And that's always was a big part of my leadership style. What about you?
Yeah, those casual conversations I think are really important. I think what it shows, the bigger picture of what that's showing is it's like a way of showing you care. And that's where real leadership comes from. People want to work for people that care about them. And that's also reciprocal. Like you don't want to lead people that you feel like don't care about you as well. And so, I feel like coffee and these other kinds of little things like that are a way to build that relationship and show you care about each other.
I think that's real interesting. And I couldn't agree more. You talk about caring. It seems like that's one of the big disconnects that we have between law enforcement leadership and nowadays and the rank and file, if you will, is that the officers don't feel like their administration cares about them. And the administration doesn't feel like the officers care about the department. And when you have that breakdown, I think that's where you start seeing some of the problems that I've found across the United States as I travel is that lack of caring.
Absolutely. And think about those good leaders. I mean, there are some great people out there. And, my experiences, I think we've talked about this before, some people, they care, but they're stuck in these systems that, make it really difficult to show that. Even leaders, captains, commanders, even sometimes chiefs, they don't have as much power sometimes as it might appear.
I think that's funny because I've always said, particularly in my basic classes, talking to the younger officers, is that they don't realize the higher and higher you go in rank at your agency, the less power you have, the less ability to make change you have, because you get tied into those systems you talked about. But those administrations, I think you see those leaderships and some of those decisions made by the administration, they don't understand the long-term effects they have, right? I mean, last year, particularly as I traveled around in 2020 at the wake of the George Floyd incident and with the pandemic at its height, and I wasn't doing a whole lot of training, but the little bits that I was doing here and there, I was getting feedback from officers that they were being told by their administrators, everything all the way up to mayors, chiefs, sheriffs, to the line administrators that don't do any police work. Don't go out, don't do anything, don't get sick, don't end up on CNN. And we saw an entire, police departments across the United States just kind of shut it down and turn it off. And I think what the interesting thing about that is what we're seeing right now in, the increases in crime across the United States. I think that's part of one of the problems we have.
Yeah, most likely. I think there's a bright light at the end of this tunnel, though, too. Through these challenges like, the George Floyd incident, like COVID and everything these police departments have, and public safety, not just police departments, it's dispatch centers, it's correctional facilities, and they're all struggling right now. But one thing, seeds are being planted. So what used to be things they didn't care about, culture, how to keep our people, those kinds of things, they're becoming more and more front and center. It kind of reminds me, this isn't the first time our industry has gone through radical change like this. I mean, you think about back in the 60s and everything going on there. Those moments crafted the leaders that ended up carrying us into the next decade and the next generation. And it makes me wonder about the seeds that are being planted, the people that are coming together and uniting in these agencies and bonding together. What's that going to bring for the future, and hopefully set us up really well?
I think that's a really important warning, if you will, for the next generation of administrators in public safety, because of the things that they're seeing right now. This is a chance to make some of those changes. And this is an opportunity to grab a hold of people, to grab a hold of that cultural change and really make a push for some good police reform. I think I've talked about it on the show several times, how I'm a fan of police reform. I'm just not a fan of the people making reforms that don't understand where those problems are. And when you look at administrations, and the defund police movement being such a big push that people are dealing with right now, but ironically enough, the opposite is happening. As I'm traveling around teaching classes, people are hiring more officers than they've ever hired before. Agencies are actually growing because crime has gone up, because of the murder rates have increased by almost more than 30% by FBI statistics at the end of September from 2020. That is a ridiculously huge number. That is a dangerous number. Generally, violent crime, you're only going to see those rises across the United States and, single digit numbers at the most. When you look at overall violent crime being up 5% from last year, that's always considered a major jump. But our murder rates are 30%. Which means I think that cities are seeing that, right? And cities are recognizing that, and they're starting to look at ways in which they can fix it. And it does have to have some of the work from the police departments and from the public safety agencies. And so the people now that are growing up have to take these lessons and use them in the future so that they can actually build a really professional police departments and public safety departments.
Yeah, it's exciting. And there's some good examples of neat leadership out there as well. We've seen, just through my company and who we interact with, we've seen a lot of interesting things, and it can be small things too. There was something posted on social media recently where they asked officers who had like a popular chief, like someone who's like in the news, or for example, that's that chief in Ohio that's really engaged with his people, seems like always still takes calls, still covers shifts so that they can have holidays off. Small things. There's a 911 director here in Indiana, and just the little kinds of leadership things, again, showing that you care. I remember he spent like $100 on a popcorn machine. So you would think, like $100, very little money was spent on this thing, but the popcorn machine was a huge hit. And now, people, the employees, they don't mind bringing their family over to the dispatch center,
right,
and, stopping by to get the kids a little bit of popcorn and doing things like that. And it's such a small example, but it's those kinds of things that I think really can make a big difference. The little things add up. One of the areas where I think interesting innovation is happening, there's all these, I don't want to call them sub positions, but historically, a lot of times they were like stepping stones, or
you're talking about the dispatchers and the corrections,
dispatchers, right? Corrections, EMS, places like that.
People got into that hoping to move on into law enforcement traditionally,
right? Until recently, there weren't TV movies about becoming a 911 dispatcher.
Yeah, but we've got big TV shows about that now.
We do now. Yeah, we do now. But that's new. That's recent. And hopefully that continues. And hopefully we can do that for corrections. And hopefully we can do that for EMS and these other industries. But, when we were growing up, you and I, it wasn't, people weren't excited if you were like, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a jail officer.
Right. That's so, I think you're right on the point there, because the public safety culture has changed over the years. And a lot of those subordinate agencies or supportive agencies have really changed. I see them in my classes a lot. guys coming in as corrections officers that have been corrections officers for a very long time, have no desire to go into the patrol side of public safety. They recognize the importance of their job. They recognize the professionalism of their job. They understand that it's the other side of that coin. And I'm seeing more and more of that, more and more professional dispatchers and in all those other public safety agencies.
The thing that I've learned over the years here is, if we think the retention issues and the recruitment hiring issues are bad for law enforcement, it's even worse for 911 dispatchers, for corrections officers, for your basic EMTs and paramedics.
The turnover rate, the training, or lack thereof that they get is absolutely ridiculous. With being one of the highest liability portions of a department, particularly in the sheriff's side that are responsible for those jails, to see such a lackadaisical view of the importance of training and hiring professional people there is pretty sad.
It is, but equally, just like we were talking about law enforcement and culture, there's also some great positive examples. And if we can look in some of these places and be like, well, if that can be successful, if you can make that work at a 911 dispatch center, well, imagine if we brought that over to the police department, or look at what, this corrections agency was able to do. If they were able to keep such a great culture, I mean, that's really impressive leadership.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beauties of both of our jobs, right? Is that you get to see it in that software side as you're selling that agency 360 onboarding software, which is such an amazing program. It works so well, and I see it through the training of a lot of these new FTOs in the agencies that really are making those cultural changes. And like you said, there are some really good success stories out there. So some great change taking place. I think sometimes we sound all negative as we complain about these groups, but it's not necessarily the case. I can look specifically at places like Flagstaff, Arizona, Coconino County Sheriff's Department doing some really great work in their jails and really changing their culture a little bit with the training that they're taking on. And I think that's the huge change that we need to see leaders making across all of public safety, is creating some of those family environments, looking for opportunities to show that they care, and then actually going out of their way to try to make some fundamental change, whether it be through hiring or training practices.
In our industry, and I've got a little bit of, in the private sector, we can do things a lot different. For example, my team at Agency 360, at least every quarter, sometimes every month, and definitely every week, we all get together and we go through the issues and we talk as a team and we unite under that situation, under that umbrella. And I just look back, like the police department, like it was impossible to do an all hands meeting. Like, who's going to cover the streets?
Right.
How do you build that relationship from the chief down to the patrol officer, or the director down to the 911 dispatcher, when everybody's working all the time, everyone's short staffed and everything. So there's some real hard challenges there.
Well, and really it comes down to it's my attack again on the defund police movement, and they love to say defund the police doesn't mean defund the police. Well, then use a word that actually works for what you're trying to say, because defund means take away their money. And if you take away their money, you don't have staffing, you don't have training, you don't actually advance anywhere. We need to be funding police departments more. And you are seeing that across the United States right now. We're seeing big increases in budgets across the United States because of those problems. I mean, Minneapolis, right, where this started, you had a police budget in 2020 of $160.6 million. Their budget for 2021 is $188.6 million for the police department. So, the place where this all kind of started actually is increasing the monies for the police department to try to do some of the things or address some of the problems that they have. So, as I've said before, is that unless funding is involved, unless the politicians and the administrators start recognizing the importance of actually funding for training, for leadership meetings, you talk about how you get those meetings together. You just have to pay a little money for it, right? Somebody got to have some overtime to get the guys in on their days off. You've got to be able to cover those shifts. So, and get those people in those kind of all hands meetings, at least shift level meetings for your bigger agencies, so that everybody gets on the same page, right? One of the biggest problems I see in training, as well as just regular law enforcement, is kind of like the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory, where there's one explosion in the center of the universe and then all the stars spread out away from that. That Big Bang Theory, everybody gets together and gets an idea about what they want to do. We all get on the same page, and then bam, It's the big bang. And all of these individuals start spreading out from the original intent. The longer left alone, they'll end up their own galaxies. Yeah. And so you got to keep bringing these people back together and keeping everybody on the same page, moving in the same direction. And that's how you're going to make good reform. That's how you're going to make some good fundamental change within your organization. But it really does come down to funding and having the staffing to do the things you need to do. If I could wave a magic wand, staffing would be the number one issue that I would solve first. Once I solve that, we can do a lot of things.
Well, how's that? So, yeah, I mean, do we want to check in from our last conversation? How do we think that's going this year compared to last year? Great place to work, staffing.
Oh, yeah.
Is it any better than it was last year?
Let me start with you. Is it better than last year? Are government agencies better places to work or worse than they were last year?
I would say it's getting better. I think, again, like we were kind of talking about earlier, the seeds are being planted. These kinds of tough situations, these tough challenges are creating opportunities for some leaders to step up. They're opening the eyes of others. So a lot of seeds are being planted. But I think to really answer whether the culture is getting better or anything like that is to just look at the retention and the recruitment numbers, which if my numbers are correct, are still not so great.
They aren't. And, when I look at that question, what I see is it depends on where you're at, because I think there are a lot of agencies, smaller agencies in various different parts of the country that are really kind of reaping the benefits of this. They saw the idea of culture a long time ago. They've had a lot of support for their agencies. They typically had really close ties to the community and generally were funded pretty well, were staffed pretty well to start with. And they have literally opened their doors to all of these officers coming out of these large police departments that had the exact opposite. Yeah, the lateral
transfers.
These guys are just, they are leaving those big cities, Seattle's, Austin, Texas, Asheville. They are just leaving these big cities and in drove Chicago, moving into these smaller places that had a much better culture to start with and care, right? We go back to that care thing. Those officers seem to care, and they're all moving into these other agencies and are very happy there. And those agencies are very happy to have them, while these major cities, or not even major cities, but cities that didn't care that much about their people, are seeing the exact opposite. Just they're bleeding officers so fast they don't know what to do with it, and it's causing some real problems. So depending on where you're at, it may be a great job to have, but other places it's still as bad as it ever was.
Yeah, at least it's coming back into, it's coming into the conversation. When you guys, when we were at the department, culture, showing you care wasn't really part of the conversation. It wasn't what we're retention. Actually, how are we going to get enough people to recruit?
The big difference I see right now, the major difference that I see right now, is that back in the day, you would hear about morale. They would say morale is low. And the officers would be that whole, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And then you'd ask them why, and they couldn't answer. They couldn't answer why they were angry or upset. Today, it's the same thing, but when you ask them, they will give you specific list, bullet points of all the problems that are having, and they're right. And that's a huge difference, because you always kind of, get to a point where you're kind of not happy with where you're at, no matter what's going on, no matter how hard they're trying. I always complain, or I always say that if you give a cop a gold bar, he'll complain about how heavy it is, right? And when you start looking at some of these agencies back in the past, we saw a lot of that. But today, that's not the case. They know exactly where the problems are. They know exactly the things they want changed. And they're leaving agencies that aren't doing that and going to agencies that are addressing those problems.
Like you wouldn't be a good person. You wouldn't be a good police officer right now if you didn't question things.
Oh, I agree completely. Absolutely.
You were probably not the right person for the job. You're probably absolutely the right person for the job if you are second guessing what you're doing right now.
40 years ago, and I talk about the change in law enforcement culture universally, 40, 50 years ago, it was yes, sir. There was no questioning the orders that you were given or what they wanted you to do. Today, that is not the case. And that's for the better. Having employees that are saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't, that's not right. And here's all the reasons why that's not right. And I want to have a discussion about this. Those are actually good employees to have. And that's the type of culture that your agency needs to set up.
Yeah. Or, the retention issue. Why am I here?
Right. Right. And you go back when you ask about how do I retain officers, just ask your officers, what do you want? And what you're going to find is they'll tell you. And if you actually follow some of those things, you'll see people stay, because you end up you're working. No matter if you didn't know a soul when you start on that department, it takes about 5 minutes before you have best friends for life. It's a kind of job that does that. And no matter where in public safety, right? No matter if you're in the dispatch center, no matter if you're in the jails, no matter if you're out on the streets, this is the type of job that really makes close bonds quickly.
Oh, especially through what we've been through, the COVID and, all of the attacks on public safety. It's if you can't figure out a way to bond with your people through all that.
Absolutely. Big problems.
That's what bigger things can you bond over? It's an opportunity just as much as it's a challenge. It's also a great opportunity for a lot of people out there right now.
It is. And I think that it's going to continue to be that way. Speaking of, I think about continuing to be that way. Let's talk about predictions now.
All right.
We bounced around some of these last time. I know you and I did. Some of them aired on our last episode we had at the end of last season, but we've got
How did we do?
More.
Did we do it? Did we do good?
I don't think we did too bad. Right. I think that most, we talked a lot about pendulum, about changes and how things are going to swing back. And I think we're already seeing that. So I think we were definitely down the right path there.
I would add a caveat. I don't know if it's too late for your listeners, but if we actually knew, if we could actually predict things, we probably wouldn't be on this podcast right now doing this.
No, I would have won a lottery by now, but or we would be in my podcast studio, the $1 million studio, right?
That's right. So keep that in mind. The quality of information we're about to relay here.
But I will say this, that you and I have been, both of us involved in public safety. I mean, we're looking at 50, 60 years of public safety and involvement between the two of us, working at a variety of different levels, private sector in public safety and working at a wide variety. So we've seen a lot of stuff. And so I think we've got a pretty good idea of some of this stuff. Do you want to start with some of your predictions or should I start with mine?
Yeah, we can go back and forth. That works too.
You do the first one. I'll take the second one.
Okay. All right. The police motorcycles will be the first part of the motor pool to go fully electric.
Oh, that's an easy one. They're already seeing that
in the motorcycles, in the motor unit.
But I've seen several motorcycles out there now, fully electric motorcycles. So I think that's pretty interesting. At a variety of police departments. Well, maybe
that's a bad one.
Well, when are they supposed to go all electric? Right? Isn't it 2035?
Something like that. Yeah, but I think we'll see it. I think, as the agency starts to convert, I was thinking, well, where are we going to see it first? I thought maybe you see the whole motorcycle unit. We'll see a couple entire motorcycle units converted to electric.
But I think, motorcycle units, and that's the easiest one, I think, to make the change first. But what do you think about just the all electric vehicles? I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I'm excited about it. So I would think it's probably in the end, a good thing, but it's no more dealing with fuel costs and everything. But I mean, it comes with its challenges. If it doesn't have the range, we go through tires a lot quicker, which we went, as police officers, we went through tires like crazy already. So there's probably additional costs there that
I think that's interesting because the items that wore out on police cars, rear ends and tires and brakes, of course, brakes typically recharge, right? So those are probably get burned out fast. That type of maintenance cost will probably go up, even though you're saving on fuel costs, I would suspect. And then range is a big one for me. I can see a local municipality not having any problem, but some of these sheriff's departments, if you've only got a 400-mile range for your whole day and it requires an 8-hour charge, that's a little tough.
State police.
I mean, you can't hot cars. You're not going to be able to hot seat cars, pool cars to where you only have a few. I mean, everybody's going to have their own, because if this car is only good for one shift, the other two can't use it.
Yeah. I mean, they're working on charging and speeding things up. So there's some new chargers out there that should make things a little bit faster, but you still can't sit for 45 minutes in an hour.
Still, but that you got to have the infrastructure built to control that.
Yes.
I think it's interesting, and we're going to be forced to go there. But you know how police departments are; they'll be wait till the very last to be drug into that.
I'm sure, probably, and there'll always be a need for the old kind of vehicles and other tools that we use at various points. But the paddy wagon could be electric. That's not going to.
Sure, absolutely. Some of your other type of specialty vehicles could be electric too. So mine.
That was a weak one. Yeah, let's hear yours.
That was an interesting one. No, I mean that was an interesting one. See, so mine, obviously, my world is training. I think that regional academies died in 2020, and they just don't know it yet. Within 5 years, the regional academy system will be gone, and we'll be in the community college-based academy systems. I definitely think that's going to happen in the states that utilize the regional academies, where everybody has to go to the one type of academy. In 2020, all those academies closed. And then you had officers working on the street that hadn't been trained properly because they haven't had the academy yet. Usually you've got a year to attend or go to that academy in most of those regional states. Some of them had to increase that waiver to 2 years. That's going to be a huge liability issue. The monies that are being spent to keep these regional academies open, it's not being recouped because you have to be paid, through the politicians, through that kind of tax service. Whereas the community-based college systems play, like an Ivy Tech or whatever that has a police academy, people can pay their own way through it. And so the actual students then absorb a lot of those costs. And in those states, you never hire a cop that doesn't have the academy yet because they've already paid for it. That's been making inroads for years, but it was always pushed back by the regional academy states saying that, they wanted cops to train cops, except that these community-based college systems have cops, actual retired as well as, active and current law enforcement and public safety training all these classes, just like an adjunct instructor that's coming in to do a couple of hours every week to get the training done. So I think with COVID, I think COVID killed these academies. They had already been having fights to keep that community college system out. But now that you had a bunch of people that that couldn't go last year and haven't been yet, I think that's going to be an end to them. So in 5 years, regional academies are gone and everybody's at a community college-based system.
Wow. Yeah, that would be, it kind of fits with everyone only hiring laterals right now.
Your training would be from the agency hiring. That's 3 months or 4 months that you don't have to worry about sending them off. And that's also faster since they already have it. You don't have to wait 3 or 4 months to get them in and then wait 3 or 4 months to get them back from training before you can start any kind of FTO or onboarding. So I think that's coming.
And just quick question there. So does the post still regulate the training at the college academy then? Is there still, still the state standards and everything? Is there?
They do. So typically most of those places, the law enforcement training boards of the post is actually going to regulate the training and what has to be done. And typically your psychomotor skills go to some kind of regional place. So they're in the community college, but they have to do a week of firearms at a certain place that is approved by post, because most of the community colleges don't have, the driving range. They don't have the firearms range, that kind of thing. Exactly. So I think you'll still see law enforcement training boards and post are going to be heavily involved with this. It's just that typical, the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, big building that, has been getting run down for years. And thankfully they just recently gave it a lot of money, but it still wasn't enough to get it back into shape. Things like that, I think it's going to go away.
All right. Mine are pretty out there. So maybe not if you didn't think the motorcycle one was really out there. I think and we're already kind of seeing this. So this probably isn't a crazy prediction. But I think we're going to see a segment of calls that we normally used to take completely removed because of the short staffing.
Sure. I think, you've got several places, like I said, Asheville being one of them, that is not taking certain calls anymore, right? They're like, don't call the police because we don't have the staffing to do it.
Yep.
You see the additions of police social workers, which I'm entirely for. As I've said before, I'm entirely for all these, things like police social workers. I think that's an awesome idea in conjunction with patrol officers, not in replacement of. That's the biggest difference, is that they have a certain job, but there's other things they can't do. So they can't be first responders. What they are kind of follow-ups tied to the police department so that they can use the resources of both to kind of help deal with problems that come up or recurring. So yeah, I agree with you on that one. And again, I don't think that's too terribly far off, because I think we're already starting to see some of it.
Yeah. So from here on out, our call list is going to be shorter.
But when you look at the call volumes and you do studies across the United States, one of the interesting thing is the number one type of call for service is the unknown disturbance call, right? Or the welfare check. Both of those, and you don't have a clue what type of call it is till the cop gets there. And you can't send the police social worker to that unknown type of call, because it could be a homicide in progress. You just don't know till you get there. So you have to have those responding officers to get there. Go, okay, wait a minute. This is something that can be worked on. What it does is it's going to free them up to go take other emergent calls that come in, and allow that long-term follow-up. Where we used to spend hours dealing with a specific problem, you'll have other people that can step in afterwards and do that. So that's why I say you have to work in conjunction with and not a replacement of.
For sure. I mean, even all the calls we go on, it can be so vague.
They are
get there. Domestic,
unknown disturbance. Couldn't advise.
Yeah, it sounds like this and this. Even dispatch, and they do a great job trying to get the details. But how many times did you get there and it was nothing like what the caller said?
Absolutely. Armed robbery. I remember an armed robbery in progress. When I got there, it was just a argument over a bill at the restaurant.
Yeah.
But the call came in as an armed robbery in progress, and it wasn't even a big argument. When I got there, both parties were like, "Why are you here?" And they're like, "This is no big deal. We were getting this taken care of." And I'm like, "I have no idea why I'm here," because somebody called and said there was an armed robbery here, but that's not what's happening. So yeah.
Yeah. Or it's just my husband, disciplining my son. And you think, oh, that's not too big a deal. And then you get there and there's been tons of violence and there's broken faces everywhere. It's you can't predict.
Really, and you just don't know till you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as we try. But all right, your turn.
Okay. So if you remember back in the 80s, particularly in the Bill Clinton administration, the Department of Justice COPS grants, COPS grants, those were the things that they would pay for a police officer's salary for 3 years. And they put a ton of police officers on the streets. And then while the Department of Justice COPS program still exists, those COPS grants pretty much disappeared over the years. Now they fund things like they'll fund like tribal police things, but they have very few grants now through COPS that are actually usable by most agencies. I think the COPS grants are coming back. The amount of funding, the amount of hiring of officers, the amount of pay that's going to change. I think that you're going to see within the next, again, I'll push this out more than just 12 months, but I think you're going to see a big push for getting more cops on the streets to deal with the violent crime, particularly homicide rates. COPS grants are coming back.
Interesting. Yeah, it'd be nice. The only problem with the grants is it's always one time. It never feels the grant runs out eventually.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be that getting their foot in the door, right? A lot of these departments that say they don't have the money to hire people, particularly if pay raises might go up for retentions, they're going to say, I can't afford to hire any more cops and we need them. And I think you're going to see the federal government start stepping in and pushing that out. Of course, you tie that into community college-based training systems and you start seeing a lot more cops hitting the streets. In other words, the pendulum swings, right? We've got 30 cops that show up in the next couple of years. I think you're going to see 300 people show up.
Some of these might be more hope than prediction.
we can run on hope.
Can we run on hope?
We can run on hope.
So this is mine. It's like the Supreme Court is going to say public servants have free speech and can say whatever they want.
Ooh, that's interesting.
I don't know if it's really going to happen, but I hope so.
Well, of course, they've already ruled that as a government entity does not have to pay for insubordination. In other words, when you become a public servant, you lose some of your First Amendment rights because of that trade-off. They've ruled on that already. It'll be really interesting to see, would they change that?
Yeah. I think there's going to be some tweaks there.
Now, why do you think so? Why do you think that change is coming?
I think social media and digital communication is just becoming like an extension of our lives. And with these rules restricting it, it's almost like, are we going to prevent teachers from having real relationships online? Are we going to prevent police officers and people who are in the government from, creating those bonds and having real conversations just because it's digital? And, the world is becoming more and more digitally social. And in some ways, these rules are, I think, holding people back.
That is an interesting one. I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one as being a kind of out there thought. That's interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Yeah.
We'll see.
So we've got some predictions on the podcast. So now we can always take a look at these next year as things roll around. Speaking of the podcast, I want to kind of transition there. What do you think about this season? What was your favorite episode for the second season?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I don't have a one favorite. I have a three favorites.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Trilogy of favorites.
Three favorites. So my first, I got to say, the interview with the candidate.
Right.
That was phenomenal. A lot of times you bring such an education to the podcast that it's really great for people who are not in public safety or who maybe weren't in law enforcement, but were maybe in a different, part of public safety. You bring so much knowledge and education to it for people outside, and you present it in a nice way. What was really great about the candidate one is like, here's something for people currently in the industry struggling with this issue. How do we get in the head of someone actually applying for the job today? I don't know, just so valuable to hear that conversation. Do you want to share one?
Sure. Yeah. I think my favorite was the interview with Vinny Montez. Yeah. That was something I had talked about. We talked about the year before, and I talked about you that, hey, this guy's popped up on my social media. He's cracking me up. I really want to hear his story and talk to him. And, not only the fact I think Vinny is hilarious and the podcast, the interview with him was very different than I kind of expected. And when we got into talking about mental health issues and the reason he got involved in doing stand-up comedy and all of that, I thought was so interesting. And I think so relevant to a lot of officers out there that'll be looking for ways to deal with some of the stress within the job. So I really, really love that. And Vinny was a great guy and took the time out to do it. And such a good communicator. I love the episode.
He's funny. What a great, representative of the industry, even his role as a comedian.
Absolutely.
Such a great job. My next favorite was the chaplain episode. I thought that was great it's this concept of like a chaplain, like, your accountants, they don't have a chaplain.
No, they don't.
It's one of the things that makes working in public safety or, in the government sector a little bit different than the private sector or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Is this long history of chaplains.
And Jim Bontrager was so fantastic. He's so knowledgeable and that's so passionate about it. And definitely as I've talked about some mental health issues in dealing with stress on the podcast, that's one of his things that he's really into as well. So it was fun to talk to him and get, that view of those issues.
Yeah. The role that plays in the organization is really great.
The Halloween episode.
That was on my list too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to knock out your last one and mine. My second one. I just had so much fun doing that. And I had done the original Halloween episode. I'm in a class. One of the guys hears that he says, hey, that was really cool. I got one too. And he tells me this and I'm like, oh, wow, that's a great story. And so coming back, sitting down, putting it together, and then turn it over to our producer, Arthur, who just knocked it out of the park. He's like, hey, can I put some sound effects into this? And I'm like, sure. Yeah, that sounds cool. And when he sent it back after he had done that, I was blown away. And so not only was it fun to do, not only I think it was a fun, creepy, true story to talk about, but Arthur's production on that was phenomenal.
You guys did such a great job. Is that going to be a Blue Canary repeat? Are we gonna standard? Are we gonna
I think definitely the Halloween bonuses are going to be something that because I've already had two more, so this is definitely going to be reoccurring. I think you'll always see a Halloween episode drop from us as long as we're doing this podcast.
Oh, great. I can't wait.
Speaking of future sessions, though, what would you like to see on next year's season?
Oh, there's a long list, Steve.
Just give me your top two things you really hope to see on next year's podcast.
Oh man, I think the interpersonal dynamics at work are really interesting to me. You know, intergenerational things, spouses. I find all of those stories really, really interesting. Like how can you be spouses at work? Like, how does that even work?
Or legacies like kids, right? And when your kids get into it, start working.
You know, and not just that. I mean, there's so many stories about how people even got into this industry, you know, people who from a different background, people from a different country, and how they're in this role as a police officer, or it doesn't even have to be a police officer, 911 dispatcher, corrections officer, how they're in this role to kind of give back and you know, give back for all they've gotten. It's really there's some great stories out there. I mean, it would be great to talk about hot topics like racism and, you know, hear that from the perspective of people in the industry, hear how it's changed, you know, talk to somebody from, you know, retired 30 years ago, and
right,
talk to someone there today and what's changed, what hasn't changed, you know, but there's just in our generation, sexism too.
Absolutely.
It's always been easy to be a female in the police department.
Absolutely not.
And in this industry. And, you know, I think there's a lot of amazing people out there who've overcome some great challenges and have some interesting stories to share. What about you? What would you like to?
You know, again, I think it comes back to that, my educational background, that really trying to push the education within it to tell people stories and to give them knowledge about things that maybe they haven't thought about. So many officers across the United States think that they're the only ones suffering from these problems, that they're the only ones with these challenges. And the reality is everybody has those same challenges. And if I can get that out there and get officers to understand that, educate them on what's going on and how things have changed and how things are going to change, I think that's always been my goal for it. So those are the types of topics that I look to add in, as well as some of the timely events too, and trying to hit a few of those timely things that we can, you know, maybe share a different view on, so that, again, they have something that the people listening to this podcast can tell their friends and be like, I got an answer to that, or I've heard why it's like that. So I think those are all things that I want to keep trying to do, and really just having a great time doing it. I mean, when we started this, I didn't know we'd have 2 seasons. You know, we're looking at about 24 episodes, I think, 2 seasons. We'll probably take a couple of months off here as we retool for season number 3, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too, Steve. You're doing a great job.
And that's the story we have to tell. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.